The evening began like any other quiet gathering, with soft lights, gentle conversation, and the low hum of music playing from hidden speakers. Guests walked around the hall in small groups, sipping drinks, exchanging short stories, and admiring the expensive art on the walls. People came dressed in their best, but the atmosphere was relaxed enough that no one felt the need to impress. It was the kind of event where strangers felt comfortable enough to smile at one another as if they had met before. Among the guests was a young man, who would come mostly because his friends insisted. He wasn't the type to show off or try to be the center of attention. In fact, he preferred quieter corners where he could simply observe everything without drawing eyes toward him. His friends were the complete opposite, lively, playful, and always trying to push him out of his comfort zone. Tonight they seemed especially determined. They found him near a small table, looking around the hall with mild curiosity. His friends walked up behind him, nudging him lightly as they pointed toward the grand piano, sitting alone at the front of the hall. It wasn't just any piano. It was a glossy, elegant instrument that looked untouched, almost too perfect to play. A soft spotlight shone over it, as if the piano itself was waiting for someone brave enough to sit down. One of his friends laughed and said, "You should go play something. Come on, it's your chance." Just one little song. Another joined in, teasing him by asking if he still remembered how to touch the keys after so many years. Their playful comments drew a few curious glances from nearby guests, which only made him more uncomfortable. He shook his head and replied quietly, "I haven't played in a very long time. I don't want to embarrass myself." His voice was steady but unsure. Deep down, he knew how much he once loved the piano, but life had pulled him away. Responsibilities, work, and personal struggles had pushed music into the background. He hadn't touched a piano seriously in years. His friends refused to give up. They nudged him again, laughing in the light-hearted way only close friends could. "It's just for fun," one of them said. "Nobody here even knows if you're good or bad. Just try. It's a dare. We promise it'll be fun. A dare." It was such a simple word, but it carried a kind of pressure that was hard to shake off. His friends weren't trying to embarrass him, they just wanted to see him step into the light for once. Still, he felt his heartbeat pick up speed. The thought of walking to the front of the room, sitting at that shining piano, and letting people watch him was terrifying. He looked around again, trying to find something that would help him escape the moment. But instead, his eyes met the quiet attention of a few guests who had overheard his friends. They weren't judging him. In fact, some looked encouraging, as if they wanted to see what he could do. And then there was the host of the event, the millionaire who owned the hall and everything inside it. The man stood on the other side of the room, speaking with a small group, but even from a distance. He kept an eye on everything happening under his roof. He wasn't paying direct attention to the young man yet, but the idea of being watched by someone like him made the dare seem even bigger. The young man's friends continued, urging him gently, their voices filled with excitement. The pressure wasn't mean-spirited, but it was real. He felt it pushing at him from every direction. He took a slow breath, trying to calm his nerves. He remembered the nights when he used to play just for himself, when the music felt like home. Maybe, he thought, it wouldn't be so bad to try again just for a moment. "Fine," he said finally, surprising even himself with the word. His friends cheered quietly, trying not to draw more attention than they already had. He stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the decision settle on his shoulders. The walk toward the piano felt longer than it should have. Each step seemed louder than the last, even though the music playing through the speakers tried to cover the sound. A few guests turned their heads, curious. Others simply stepped aside politely to give him space. His palms felt warm and slightly sweaty as he approached the piano. He paused for a moment, standing in front of it, unsure if he should continue. It had been so long. What if he forgot everything? What if he hit the wrong key in the first second? What if the room went silent for the wrong reason? But backing out now wasn't an option. His friends were watching from across the hall, giving him small, encouraging gestures. Even some strangers offered subtle smiles, as if they were rooting for him without knowing him at all. He finally pulled out the bench and sat down. The soft cushion sank under his weight, grounding him slightly. He placed his hands on his lap for a moment, trying to steady his breathing. The piano keys were right in front of him, shining under the spotlight. Waiting, he lifted his hands slowly and placed them gently on the keys. The touch was familiar, yet distant. It felt like meeting an old friend he hadn't seen in years, both comforting and awkward at the same time. The room around him began to quiet down a little. More guests noticed what was happening, their conversations softening as they turned to watch. He didn't look at them. He didn't dare to. He kept his eyes on the keys. He pressed the first key. A soft sound floated into the air, barely noticeable, but enough to make a few heads tilt in interest. He hesitated before pressing the next key. The melody was slow, unsure, almost shy. But it was something of beginning. Inside, he felt a storm of emotions. His mind tried to recall the rhythm, the muscle memory, the feeling he used to have when he played freely. His fingers felt stiff at first, as if they were waking from a long sleep. The notes were simple. He wasn't trying anything complicated. He just needed to start. He could hear faint whispers from a couple of guests nearby. They weren't mocking him. They were simply curious, maybe surprised that someone had dared to touch the piano at all. Far across the room, the millionaire finally took notice. He turned his head slightly, raising an eyebrow as he watched the young man seated at the piano. The host didn't expect much. Most people who attempted to play at gatherings only knew a few basic melodies. But something about the young man's posture made him watch a little longer. The young man's fingers moved with caution, trying to remember the flow he once had. Each note was gentle, as if he was testing the piano rather than performing. He could feel every gaze on him even though he kept his eyes down. A small tremble ran through his hands, but he pushed through it. The room hadn't gone silent, but it had grown quieter. People were interested. People were watching. And for the first time in a long while, he was playing again. The soft melody filled the air. It's not powerful enough to impress anyone yet, but gentle enough to create a fragile sense of calm. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. It was simply the start of something he had almost forgotten, something that had once mattered deeply. As he continued pressing the keys, the young man realized that this small dare was becoming bigger than he expected. The room felt different now, as if the air held a quiet anticipation. He could feel his friends watching with a mix of excitement and nervous pride. The millionaire watched as well, his expression unreadable but focused. The young man didn't know what would happen next. All he knew was that he was playing again, and the moment had already taken on a life of its own. He pressed the next key, then another, letting the melody guide him slowly forward, and the night began to shift in a way he never saw coming. The room grew quieter by the second. Though the young man tried not to think about it, he kept his eyes lowered, pretending the world behind him didn't exist. But he could feel everything: the shifting footsteps, the soft murmurs, the curious glances. It all created a strange mix of pressure and encouragement. His fingers moved slowly across the keys. The melody he had started was gentle, simple, almost like a whisper. It wasn't the kind of music that stunned people, but it was enough to draw their attention. Even he could sense that. And yet, the more attention he felt behind him, the more his nerves tightened. His hands trembled again. He paused for just half a second, pretending it was part of the music. But inside he felt his heartbeat rush as if he had run across the hall. He took a breath, steadying himself, and pressed the next key. His friends stood on the other side of the room, watching with big smiles. They didn't expect him to play perfectly. They didn't even expect him to go through with the dare. But there he was, sitting at the spotlighted piano, playing like he was trying to reconnect with a piece of himself. One of the guests whispered quietly, "He seems nervous, but it sounds nice." Another nodded, watching more closely than before. Even though the guests kept their voices low, the young man could sense their attention. The millionaire, who had been talking with a group near the entrance, slowly shifted his focus. He took a step forward, curiosity rising as he watched the young man. Nothing about the performance looked planned. In fact, it looked almost accidental, like someone who wasn't sure whether to stay or stand up and walk away. But that made it even more interesting. The millionaire crossed his arms and kept observing. He didn't say anything. He just watched with a calm but thoughtful expression. People who knew him well would notice something rare in his eyes, a small spark of curiosity he didn't often show. Meanwhile, the young man tried to push away the awareness of being watched. He looked at his hands, trying to remember the feeling he used to have when playing. There was a time when music felt natural, when his fingers didn't need to think before moving. A time when the piano was his escape. But now, those memories were distant. Like fading colors he was trying to bring back, he reached a part of the melody where his fingers felt unsure. He slowed down, hoping to catch himself before making a mistake. He could feel the pressure growing inside him, pressure to not embarrass himself, pressure to not prove that his fears were right. A tiny sigh left his lips, barely noticeable, but enough to release a little of the tension he carried. The notes drifted through the hall, gentle and soft. Some guests leaned on nearby tables, others folded their arms and watched with interest. No one was mocking him. No one was judging. But that didn't make the moment any less overwhelming. His mind wandered briefly to earlier. Here's moments when he used to play for hours without thinking. He remembered how his old teacher used to tell him that music wasn't just skill, it was emotion. And maybe that was why he felt so conflicted now. He still had the emotion, but the confidence and practice had faded. He pressed another key, slightly louder this time. A small mistake crept in, the note didn't match the melody exactly. A few people noticed, but no one reacted in a harsh way. In fact, some smiled softly, as if they understood the courage it took to play in front of so many people. The millionaire raised an eyebrow, not at the mistake, but at the young man's reaction. He didn't freeze. He didn't panic. He simply continued, adjusting his pace and moving forward. It showed something, perhaps a quiet determination he wasn't even aware he had. One of the guests whispered, "He's nervous, but there's something there." Another nodded, replying, "Yeah, he's holding back. You can almost feel it." The young man wasn't aware of their comments, but he could sense the atmosphere changing. The room wasn't filled with doubt anymore. It was filled with curiosity, gentle curiosity that encouraged him, even if silently. He reached the end of the small melody he had started, and a tiny pause followed. He had to choose to stop now and leave the moment behind, or continue and let whatever was inside him come out naturally. He could feel the weight of the decision. His fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. A long second passed, then another. His friends watched, holding their breath, unsure what he would do next. The millionaire took a slow step forward, almost unconsciously, as if the decision mattered to him as well. The young man inhaled deeply, letting the air spread calmness through him. He lowered his shoulders slightly and placed his hands firmly on the keys again. Without thinking too much, he started a new section. It wasn't part of the same melody, but something different, something he remembered from years back. His fingers moved with a little more confidence this time. Not much, but enough to show he wasn't done yet. The notes came out steady, smoother than before. The flow felt clearer, like the memory of the music was slowly returning to him. The guests noticed immediately. Their expressions shifted from polite interest to genuine attention. The young man didn't know if it was because the music improved or because he seemed more sure of himself. Either way, he felt a tan, invisible shift in the room. The millionaire's face softened slightly. He wasn't smiling, but he was clearly impressed that the young man chose not to walk away after the first melody. The hall grew quieter. Even the sound from the hidden speakers seemed to fade as the young man's live notes took over the atmosphere. The soft glow of the lights reflected off the polished piano, creating a warm circle around him. He didn't notice it, but others did. It almost looked like the moment was made for him. His hands grew steadier with each passing second. The melody took on a gentle, emotional tone, full of hesitation, but also something sincere. It wasn't loud. It wasn't powerful. But it was real. People could feel that. A couple standing near the wall exchanged a look. One whispered, "He's better than he thinks." The other replied, "He just needs to believe it." But the young man wasn't thinking about belief or skill. He was thinking about the music, the simple, calming feeling of letting his fingers move across the piano like they used to. Another small part of the melody reached a delicate point, and he slowed down again. His brows lowered slightly in concentration, his lips pressed together as he tried to keep the rhythm smooth. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And that was what kept the guests watching. He felt a slight pang of nervousness again, but he pushed through it. The soft notes continued filling the air, floating gently between the guests. The hall seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The millionaire's eyes didn't leave him. The host had seen many performances in his life, some from professionals and some from amateurs. But this one was different. It wasn't about skillet. It was about someone rediscovering something they had forgotten, and that made it worth watching. The young man reached another pause. His fingers hovered above the keys again, ready but uncertain. He took one more breath, then continued, slowly building the melody again. The music felt like a quiet conversation between him and the piano, as if they were trying to understand each other once more. A few guests moved closer. It's not too close to disturb him, but enough to hear better. Their footsteps were light, respectful, almost cautious. His friends exchanged relieved glances. They could see that he was finding a small piece of comfort. They didn't know where the moment would lead, but they knew it was growing into something meaningful. The young man's shoulders relaxed, little by little as the music continued. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't need to. The world behind him had gone quiet enough that he could sense their attention without seeing it, and though he didn't know it yet. The guests weren't just watching him, they were feeling what he was feeling. A melody that started as a nervous dare had turned into a soft, fragile moment that held everyone in place. The young man pressed another series of gentle notes, letting the melody rest lightly in the hall. The night was slowly shifting. One quiet note at a time, the young man continued playing, still unsure of himself but slowly warming to the keys. The melody he was weaving into the air began to shift, quietly at first, as if testing its own strength. His fingers felt stiff now and then, yet each new note carried a little more confidence than the last. He did not plan what to play. He simply followed whatever his hands remembered. The guests around him sensed the change before he did. A woman near the front tilted her head, listening more closely. A man carrying a drink paused in mid-step, forgetting the conversation he was in. Even the soft hum of voices around the hall faded until only the gentle music and the faint clinking of glasses filled the space. The young man still did not dare to look behind him. If he looked, he feared he might lose whatever small courage he had gathered. So he kept his eyes on the keys, letting his world shrink to the space right before him. But the world behind him was growing. More people were stopping. More eyes were watching. Some leaned forward slightly, drawn in without meaning to. Others gave each other small gestures. Surprised by the unexpected shift in the room, the millionaire took a few more steps forward. Though he kept a respectable distance, he watched with an expression that was difficult to read, part curiosity, part surprise. He had seen many performers, many musicians, many show-offs, many pretenders. But this young man was none of those things. This was someone rediscovering his own voice, and that made the moment different. The young man's fingers began moving faster, almost without permission. A more complex pattern formed. It wasn't perfect. There were tiny slips in timing, a few uneven notes, but the music had gained depth. A soft emotion ran through it, something honest and warm, something he hadn't felt in years. He pressed into a higher register, letting the melody climb slowly like a breath rising in the chest. A few people leaned in closer, their expressions softening. Some smiled, some listened silently. Some closed their eyes for a brief moment, as if letting the music settle inside them. The room was no longer doubting him. It was listening. He could feel his heartbeat steadying. No longer racing in fear, but in something else. Momentary excitement. Maybe even a spark of joy. His shoulders lowered slightly. His hands loosened. For the first time since he sat at the piano, he felt the familiar warmth of connection. He remembered practicing late at night, when the world was quiet. He remembered losing himself in melodies he created from emotions he didn't know how to express. He remembered playing until his fingers felt sore. but his heart felt light. He had forgotten how it felt, but now, a small piece of that old feeling returned. A guest, standing near the back, whispered to someone. "This wasn't what I expected," the other replied softly. "I thought he was just joking around." But listen to him. Their voices faded into the background as the music grew smoother, richer. The young man slowly transitioned from the gentle pattern into something brighter. The tempo lifted slightly. His fingers moved more boldly. It was still humble, still unsure in the edges. But there was a quiet passion forming. He didn't think he had the courage to play something like this in front of others. But his hands had chosen for him, and he followed. The millionaire noticed the shift as well. He tilted his head and watched more carefully. This was not a random melody. This was someone opening up note by note. The young man's friends stood together, wide-eyed. They looked at one another as if questioning whether this was really the same friend they had pushed toward the piano. Their teasing had been lighthearted. They only wanted him to try something fun, but they never expected him to play with this much emotion. One of them whispered, almost in disbelief, "He used to play like this. Why didn't he ever show us?" Another shook their head quietly. Maybe he didn't think he could anymore. The young man pressed into a familiar set of chords. The motion felt natural, like muscle memory waking after a long sleep. A small smile almost formed on his face, but he held it back. "Still too focused to let go yet?" he continued. Letting the melody build layer by layer, the hall lights shimmered softly against the polished piano, creating a warm glow around him. It was as if the room had dimmed itself, leaving the music to guide everything. His fingers moved to the lower notes, giving the melody weight. The sound grew deeper, fuller. It wasn't loud, but it had presence. A gentle strength formed beneath each stroke of the keys. Guests exchanged looks of admiration. Some nodded slightly, impressed by the sudden progression of skill. Some whispered to each other, but kept their voices low out of respect for the moment. The millionaire's expression shifted, just slightly, his eyes narrowing with interest. He had heard many piano performances, some from talented students, some from professionals paid to entertain. But none of them carried this mixture of hesitation, rawness, and sudden beauty. He began to realize the young man wasn't trying to perform, he was remembering. The young man reached another transition point in the melody. His fingers trembled again, not from fear, but from emotion. He wasn't just playing the piano. He was reliving a piece of his past he had locked away. But the tremble settled as soon as he pressed the next note, and that note changed everything. The melody that followed was different, more fluent, more confident, more alive. It was as if his hands finally trusted themselves. The music flowed with a soft energy that surprised even him. His back straightened unconsciously. His shoulders lifted slightly. The tension in his face eased. He was still nervous, but something deeper was taking over. The guests felt the change instantly. A few gasped quietly, not loudly, but in a way that showed they recognized the shift. A couple who had been about to walk toward the snack table stopped, mid-step, and turned back around. Even the servers carrying trays slowed down. Their eyes drifting toward the piano, the young man continued, letting the new energy carry the melody forward. The music began to fill more of the room, reaching corners the earlier notes hadn't touched. It wasn't grand. It wasn't dramatic, but it was heartfelt, deeply, sincerely heartfelt. Someone near the front whispered, "Where was he hiding all this?" Another replied softly, "He didn't hide it. He lost it, but he's finding it again." The millionaire raised his chin slightly, now fully focused. There was something unmistakable in the music, a spark of natural talent shaped by years of practice, then forgotten, then unexpectedly awakened. The young man didn't know any of this. All he felt was the quiet blooming inside him, a warmth spreading through his chest, a sense of release. He didn't know what the guests were feeling. He didn't know the millionaire was watching so closely. He didn't know his friends were staring at him in disbelief. He only knew that he felt alive in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. He pressed deeper into the keys, letting a stronger progression fill the space. The melody took a bolder form, still soft, still gentle, but more confident. The notes carried emotion in them, the kind of emotion that couldn't be faked. People could feel it. The room responded naturally. Conversation stopped entirely. Every eye was on him. The young man's breathing slowed, syncing with the rhythm. His fingers glided over the keys, sometimes quick, sometimes slow, always guided by instinct. He didn't think about the next note. The music simply moved through him. It was no longer a dare, no longer a moment of fear. It was something real. A soft, unexpected power rose in the melody, surprising even him with its intensity. The guests leaned in. His friends exchanged looks again, overwhelmed by pride and shock, and the millionaire, for the first time in the evening, took a slow breath and whispered to himself, "There it is." The young man didn't hear him, but the music did. He played on, letting the new energy carry him forward, and in that moment, the room wasn't just listening, it was witnessing a quiet transformation. The afternoon sun was slowly fading, casting a soft glow over the room as the crowd settled into their seats. No one knew what was about to happen, and the quiet energy inside the hall felt like the warm breath before a storm. The young performer stepped toward the piano again, feeling the weight of silent expectations pressing against their shoulders. Even so, there was something peaceful in the air, something that reminded them why they loved the instrument in the first place. They sat down slowly, letting their fingers rest on the cool keys. For a moment, they didn't play anything. They just breathed. The people in the front rows leaned forward without realizing it. Some whispered to each other, wondering if this part would be better, louder, or more emotional than before. Others simply watched, waiting for that spark. That shift that made a simple performance feel like a story. Then, in one gentle motion, the first note filled the air. It was soft, almost too soft to catch at first, like it might disappear before anyone could hold on to it. But it didn't. It grew. The notes unfolded like small pieces of memory, each one drifting across the room with its own quiet meaning. The audience didn't know what those memories were, but they could feel them anyway. Something in the music connected, as if every key carried a small truth. The performer felt their hands warming as they played. Every movement felt more fluid, more honest, as though their body finally remembered what it wanted to say. They let the music flow without forcing it. They stopped thinking about impressing anyone. They stopped worrying about mistakes. Instead, they played for the simple joy of touching the keys, of letting the sound build naturally. A few people in the audience looked at each other, surprised by the change. The earlier part of the performance had been good, but this felt different, stronger, more open. It was as if the performer was inviting them into a part of their mind they normally kept hidden. A slow swell of melody filled the room, traveling from one side to the other like a soft tide. Someone in the back closed their eyes, letting the music wrap around them. Another person placed a hand over their chest without knowing why. Even the children in the room, who usually found eyes, stood there for a moment, his fingers still tingling from the long stretch of music he had just played. The applause from earlier kept echoing softly in his ears, but now the room felt strangely quiet. People were still watching him, but their expressions had changed. It wasn't the casual curiosity from before. It was something deeper, something heavier, something he didn't quite know how to respond to. He had not expected anything like this. When he sat down in front of that grand piano, he had only wanted to get through the dare without embarrassing himself. He didn't think the music would come back. He didn't think his hands would remember. But once the melody formed, once his fingers found their own way, the world around him had disappeared. In that short time, it had felt like he sank into something familiar, like meeting an old friend he had forgotten he once loved. But now, he was back in the present, surrounded by an audience that had completely shifted. People stared at him as if they were trying to understand how someone so quiet, someone so overlooked all night, could suddenly reveal something none of them saw coming. The millionaire had not moved from his spot yet. He remained standing near the center of the room, his eyes focused on the young man at the piano. There was no smile on his face, no sign of what he was thinking. It was impossible to tell whether he was impressed, confused, were simply surprised. This silence made the moment feel even bigger. The young man cleared his throat as he stood up, unsure of what to do. A few guests began whispering again, but this time, the whispers were not mocking or doubtful. They were astonished, confused, almost excited. Some guests leaned toward each other as if trying to make sense of what they had just heard. He looked around, feeling a little overwhelmed. He wished someone would laugh and say it was all just a lucky moment. He wished someone would make a small joke, so the pressure would fade. But no one did. They just kept watching him. Finally, the millionaire stepped forward. His footsteps were slow, steady, but confident. The room naturally parted for him as he made his way to the piano. Every pair of eyes followed him until he stopped right next to the young man. For a moment, he didn't say anything. The young man tried to read his expression, but the millionaire's face was calm, almost unreadable. Then he spoke in a low, thoughtful tone. "I wasn't expecting that," he said. The young man let out a small, nervous breath. "Unsure if that was good or bad, you played with more feeling than I've heard in a long time," the millionaire added. This caught the young man off guard. Compliments, especially ones like this, were something he rarely heard. He didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded. "Where did you learn to play like that?" the millionaire asked. The young man hesitated. Talking about his past wasn't something he did easily. It always felt like opening a door he had kept locked for too long. "I used to play a lot," he finally said. "Mostly when I was younger. I stopped after. Life got busy, I guess." The millionaire kept listening quietly, and the young man felt strange standing there with everyone waiting for him to continue. "It's been years," he added softly. "I didn't think I could still play like that." The millionaire nodded slowly, as if trying to process what he had heard and what he had just witnessed. "Sometimes talent doesn't disappear," the millionaire said. "It waits." The young man wasn't sure what to say to that. He felt a little exposed, as if someone had just opened a window into his past without warning, before he could respond. The millionaire looked toward the piano for a moment, examining it as if seeing it differently after the performance. Then he turned back. "Play something else," he said. The young man's heart skipped. "I write now?" he asked. "Yes, if you're comfortable," the millionaire replied calmly. His friends, who had dared him earlier, exchanged startled glances. They hadn't expected the night to go this far. One of them even mouthed, "Do it," with a mix of excitement and disbelief. The young man hesitated. A big part of him was nervous. He could feel the weight of everyone's attention pressing on him. But another part of him, the same part that had remembered the music earlier, was curious. Something inside wanted to see if that magic could happen again. After a quiet breath, he nodded. He sat down once more, adjusting the bench slightly. His hands hovered above the keys, and for a moment, he closed his eyes. He tried to shut out the pressure, the whispers, the expectation. He tried to go back into the feeling he had found earlier, to that peaceful place where only the music spoke. When he touched the keys again, the first notes were soft. They flowed like a quiet memory, gentle and warm. This time, the melody wasn't as dramatic. It was calm and slow, almost like a conversation with himself. But as he continued, something shifted again. His hands grew more confident, the music became more expressive, and the room fell into silence. Every guest watched him closely, but he didn't see them now. He was inside the sound again, lost in it. The millionaire watched too, but his expression softened. He wasn't just observing anymore. He was listening. The melody rose and fell like a long sigh, carrying a mix of hope and longing. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. It felt honest, and that honesty touched the room in a way no one expected. When he finally finished, the last note melted slowly into the air. The young man opened his eyes and looked around. The room remained perfectly still for a moment. Then, one by one, the guests began to clap. The applause was softer than before, but deeper, filled with respect rather than surprise. The millionaire nodded with a rare look of admiration. "You play from a place most people can't reach," he said quietly. The young man felt his cheeks warm. Receiving praise from someone so respected felt unreal. "I'm glad you played again," the millionaire continued. "You've given this room something it will remember for a long time." The young man didn't know how to respond. He stood slowly, still trying to steady his breathing. The millionaire glanced around at the guests and then back at him. "Come talk to me later," he said. "There's something we should discuss." With that, the millionaire stepped away, leaving the young man standing beside the piano with his thoughts swirling. His friends rushed over with wide eyes and excited whispers. "What just happened?" one of them asked. Another looked as if he couldn't believe what he had seen. "You were incredible," one friend said. Shaking his arm in disbelief, the young man laughed softly, though he still felt overwhelmed. "I didn't even know I could do that," he admitted. His friends exchanged looks that were full of pride now. Not teasing, they stayed around the piano for a while, talking and replaying the moment again and again. But the young man couldn't stop thinking about the millionaire's words, especially the part about wanting to talk later. What could he possibly want? And why did his performance matter so much? The question stayed with him as he walked through the room. People stopping him along the way to compliment him or simply tell him how touched they were. He had never been the center of attention before, and it all felt unreal. Eventually, he found a quiet corner near a window and stepped aside to gather his thoughts. The night air drifting in felt cool and gentle. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to calm himself. He didn't know what the rest of the night would bring. But one thing was certain, this simple dare, a challenge he had taken only to avoid embarrassment, had turned into something far bigger and deep inside. He felt that this was only the beginning. The young man stayed near the window for a long moment, letting the cool air settle the thoughts running through his mind. He could still hear faint applause from earlier echoing inside him, not because the room was still clapping, but because his heart hadn't caught up with everything that happened. It felt like the night was unfolding faster than he could process, as if the world had suddenly shifted its pace around him. His fingers still tingled from the last song he played. He rubbed his hands together gently, as if trying to understand how they had created something that changed the entire room. He looked down at them for a moment, almost surprised they belonged to him. These hands had once spent years practicing, dreaming, reaching for something he eventually walked away from. And yet somehow, tonight they spoke again. He wasn't sure what the millionaire wanted to talk about, but the thought of it made his stomach flutter. Was it praise? Advice? An offer? A warning? He had no idea. People continued to pass him, offering warm smiles, small compliments, and grateful nods. Most of them didn't say much. They didn't need to. Their eyes carried the message clearly enough. Some looked like they wanted to ask him questions, but they held back, giving him space. It was the kind of quiet respect he wasn't used to receiving. His friends eventually joined him again, still excited, still buzzing with energy, as if they couldn't believe they were standing beside the person who had just turned the entire room silent with music. One of them nudged him lightly. "You good?" He nodded, though he wasn't sure he meant it. "I think so," he said. "Well," another friend said with a grin. "Looks like that dare wasn't such a bad idea after all." He let out a soft laugh. If someone had told him earlier that a simple dare would lead to all this, he would have never believed it. "What do you think he wants to talk to you about?" one friend asked. He shook his head. "I don't know. I'm trying not to overthink it." But he was overthinking it. Every possible idea flashed in his mind, some realistic, many completely unrealistic. But the truth was, nothing about tonight had felt predictable. Anything seemed possible now. Eventually, one of the event staff approached him quietly. "Excuse me," she said softly. "He would like to see you now." His heart thudded once, hard. His friend straightened, suddenly serious. He took a small breath, nodded, and followed the staff member. The room was still buzzing softly with conversation. But as he walked past, he noticed a few people watching him again, probably guessing where he was going. He tried not to focus on them. He just kept his eyes ahead. The staff member led him to a smaller side room connected to the main hall. It was quieter here, calmer, with warm lighting and shelves filled with books and framed memories. The millionaire stood by a tall window, looking out for a moment before turning around. "Thank you for coming," he said. The young man nodded politely. Of course, The millionaire motioned for him to sit, but the young man remained standing for a moment, unsure. The millionaire noticed the hesitation. "Relax," he said with a small smile. "You're not in trouble." That helped a little. He took a seat. The millionaire sat across from him, folding his hands on the table. "I want to talk about your music," he began. The young man nodded slowly. "What you played tonight," the millionaire continued, "wasn't just skill. It had heart. It had something real behind it. That is very rare." The young man felt a warmth in his chest at hearing this. He had always wondered if his playing meant anything to anyone, if it had ever touched people the way music once touched him. "I stopped for a long time," he said softly. "I didn't think I still had anything left." The millionaire studied him for a moment. "Why did you stop?" he asked. He hesitated. Talking about this wasn't easy, but something about the tone, the calmness in the millionaire's voice, made him feel like he could share. "Life got busy," he said quietly. "Responsibilities, work, other things I felt I had to focus on. Music became something I kept putting aside. One day I just didn't go back." The millionaire nodded with understanding. "That happens to many people," he said. "But what matters is that the music didn't leave you." The young man looked down at his hands. Again, it didn't feel like it left tonight. "He," whispered Dot. There was a short silence before the millionaire leaned forward. "Slightly, I want to offer you something," he said. The young man lifted his head. "I host events, fund small projects, support artists, and help people with real talent find the space they need to grow. Tonight, you showed me something special, something that shouldn't stay hidden." The young man felt his breath catch. "I'd like to support your music," the millionaire continued. "Lessons, recordings, performances, whatever direction you choose, I want to help you take the next step. If you want to." For a moment, the young man just stared at him. He wasn't expecting anything like this, not even close. His mind spun with shock, confusion, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "I don't know what to say," he finally said. "Say whatever feels honest." The millionaire replied. The young man took a long breath. "I'm grateful," he said. "I really am. I just never thought I'd get another chance. I didn't think anyone would ever see anything in my playing again." The millionaire smiled. "Sometimes it takes just one moment," he said. "One performance. One dare." They both shared a small laugh at that. "But don't feel pressured," the millionaire added. "Think about it. Take your time. My offer will still be here whenever you're ready." The young man nodded slowly, still trying to process everything. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "Really, this means more than you know." "I have an idea," the millionaire said. "Before you decide anything, let's do something simple. Play again sometime, not for a crowd, not for an event, just for yourself, and see how it feels. If it brings you peace, if it brings you joy, then you'll know what to do." The young man felt something shift inside him. A small spark. A quiet hope. "I think I'd like that," he said softly. The millionaire gave him a gentle nod. "Good." The meeting ended on that warm note. When the young man stepped back into the hallway, felt different, lighter, inspired, unsure, but in a hopeful way. His friends spotted him the moment he walked out and rushed over. "Well," one whispered excitedly. "What happened?" He smiled in a shy, almost stunned way. "He wants to help me," he said. Their jaws dropped. "What do you mean, help you?" another asked. "He wants to support my music," he said simply. His friends erupted with joy, patting his shoulders, cheering under their breath, almost too loud for the hallway. "I can't believe this," one friend said. "This is crazy," another laughed. "We dared you to play as a joke. And now look at you." The young man laughed too, shaking his head as if the whole world had become too unbelievable to process. They eventually returned to the main room together. The event was slowly calming down, people wrapping up conversations, preparing to leave. But many still turned to look at him, some giving a wave, others offering one last compliment before heading out, as they prepared to go. He looked back at the grand piano one last time. The same piano he had approached nervously not once, but twice in front of a room full of strangers. He walked toward it slowly. No one was watching him now. No pressure, no dare, no expectations. He placed his hand gently on the polished surface. It felt warm. He let his fingers rest there for a moment, knowing tonight had changed something inside him. This piano, this moment, this night, none of it was planned. But it awakened a part of him he had forgotten as he turned to leave with his friends. One thought stayed with him. Sometimes life opens a door when you least expect it. Sometimes a quiet talent finds its voice again. And sometimes a simple dare becomes the moment that changes everything. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning of something he never thought he would get back.